Thanks for coming on. Kegan Gill is today's guest. He is a retired naval pilot, and his story is absolutely incredible. And you have a new book coming out on the 21st of January, correct?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay. And I have a pre-order in. I didn't read the book yet, but we've hung out enough and I've heard your story enough times that I really I'm really just blown away by your recovery and your motivation and just all the things you've uncovered about yourself and the American health system and stuff like that. So why don't we just get
Yeah.
started right into like your book, okay? Phoenix Revival. What is it? Tell us your story.
Yeah. Phoenix Revival is a memoir of the wild experiences that I managed to go through and survive. That I'm very blessed to be here, to say the least. But the reason I wrote this book is because I know that I went through a very dark place in a dark time where all hope was lost, and I was put into a corner in the mental health treatment system that's very dysfunctional in our country, along with a lot of mainstream medicine, which is relying on just pharmaceutical pills. And I was put into a place and told by the people in white lab coats with doctorate degrees that, my only hope moving forward was that I just had to take these pills that made me feel miserable the rest of my life. And that just being miserable all the time was just my new normal. And I was fortunate to discover an entire world of real health that's largely based on your own decisions and discipline and lifestyle that can drastically improve whatever situation you're in and whoever you are and whatever you're going through in life. And I wanted to share that journey to inspire people and then arm them with the tools and practical steps and resources so that they too can achieve profound healing that I was fortunate to have. And maybe to save them the time that I spent, struggling through the system in years in darkness that were completely unnecessary had I known what I know now. So that's sort of why I wrote the book, Phoenix Revival. It's the aftermath of naval aviation's fastest survived ejection. To kind of get into my story a little bit, I was, as you alluded to earlier, I was a Navy F-18 Super Hornet pilot. And on January 15th, 2014, it was just like another day in the squadron. I'd started to kind of fall into the pace of things, and I was going out on this flight. And before I walked on the flight, I'd been in the squadron for almost a year. I'd already completed over 3 years of flight training before that to earn my wings as a naval aviator, to go through the F-18 training syllabus. And now I was an active pilot in a fleet squadron preparing to deploy. And despite being in the squadron for almost a year, I still hadn't earned a call sign, which was pretty unusual. And in the Navy, you get a call sign because it's a badge of dishonor. Whatever the dumbest thing you've done or like the goofiest thing about your name or your appearance, something that you hate is most likely going to be your call sign. But I'd played the small mouth, big ears card very well, and didn't really stick out anyways. I was doing my job. I was doing my ground jobs well. I was performing well in the aircraft, learning, drinking from the fire hose. Being a new strike fighter pilot is, overwhelming oftentimes, but I was kind of keeping stride with it. And this day in January, I show up to the squadron to go fly. And one of the more senior pilots in the squadron even points out, "Hey man, you just haven't done anything dumb enough yet to earn a call sign." There was like 4 or 5 newer guys in the squadron that they hadn't, they already earned call signs and they'd only been there for a couple months. So I walk up to the duty desk to start my flight brief, and my buddy Fisty's at the duty desk. And as a joke, he put up on the whiteboard behind him all the airspace we were going to utilize that day. But underneath it, he used the Shark Tracker app to mark all these locations of GPS tagged sharks that were actually out in the ocean off the coast of Virginia Beach. And it just so happened there was a 16-foot, 3,500-pound white shark named Mary Lee directly underneath my airspace. And so he was joking with me. Hey, he's like, "Oh man, today would be a terrible day to eject. We've got the buoy temperature, the water temp near where you're going to be flying is at 37 degrees Fahrenheit. So especially chilly, frigid ocean water. We've got below freezing air temps. We've got some winds, so the seas are churned up. And there's a great white shark that's a freaking beast right underneath
Lovely.
your airspace. So we're joking about this, with our morbid sense of humor, as I'm sure you remember from the military. Like, so comes, to get you through the tough times, you just got to joke about the absurdity sometimes. But
so that's something that's on every pre-flight arrangement. Is if you're flying over the seas, is there any great white sharks tagged in there? That's a common thing.
That's not SOP by any means, but Fisty kind of added that for the day just as a joke, to keep things light. So we do like the water temperature and the air temps and what the sea states are, because that dictates if we're going to wear a dry suit or not, and just good information to have. But the shark thing was an added bonus on this particular day. That's not normally there, so this is kind of unusual actually. And anyways, an hour after that conversation, I'm out over the Atlantic Ocean, about 50 miles off the coast of Virginia Beach over the Atlantic Ocean, and we're dogfighting. We're practicing BFM, or basic fighter maneuvering, also known as air combat maneuvering. It's probably the epitome of what people think when they think fighter pilot, which is a couple or more aircraft within visual range of one another, trying to shoot each other down with various weapon systems. It's very dynamic. You're pulling a lot of G-force, so it's sort of like doing a high intensity interval training. Your body can easily weigh up to 1,600 plus pounds, depending on your size, under that sort of G-force. So you can just feel all that through your body, through your head, through your neck. You're running multiple aircraft systems. You're running defensive systems. You're running weapon systems. You're trying to think tactically ahead. So you're playing chess in a way, in this wild 4-dimensional high-speed chess with an elephant on your lap. And it was absolutely my most favorite thing to do in the jet, and was incredibly satisfying, but incredibly difficult. Anyways, kind of fast forward to the end of our flight, we hit our Joker fuel state, meaning we had just enough fuel to set up for one more short round as we kind of exited the airspace and headed back to Oceana. And as we set up, we ended up setting up a little bit lower and faster than what's standard, but we were just trying to make the best of the time and airspace we had still for our remaining fuel. So we set up at 12,500 feet, which is over 2 nautical miles straight up. So still the ground wasn't an immediate concern. We set a 5,000 foot tactical hard deck for the training. That way, if you accidentally bust through that's supposed to be the simulated ground, you're not going to be injured because it's just a buffer. But anyways, we set up for the fight. He calls 3, 2, 1, fights on. And we pitched our jets in from about a mile of beam in towards each other. And as we meet at the merge where we cross our paths, I was already nose low with the jet and partially inverted, and I opted to continue my pull down towards the ocean. And typically in the Super Hornet, you can do this maneuver, this vertical split S maneuver, in 5,000 feet or less. So as we hit the merge, we're at 10,500 feet. I do the quick mental math. Okay, I've got over 5,000 feet. I should be good to pull. And as I pull the jet, as I hit about bullseye nose low, so pointed straight down at the ocean, I can feel all the G-force pulling 7.5 Gs. I can feel the weight of my head in my Jehemix helmet, this cool weapon system helmet on my head, weigh about 20 pounds when I'm sitting here at 1 G on the ground. Now that I'm almost 8 times that weight, now it's like having 150 plus pounds gear on my head, and you're craning your neck around, you're looking around trying to keep sight of the other aircraft. And so you can really feel all that. And then all of a sudden, the aircraft just settled and it stopped turning, and the stick was in my lap. And immediately I was in an out of control flight situation. The aircraft was not responding to my control input as it should have. I pulled the stick in my lap, just being like, what is going on? Very quickly, I hear my radar altimeter go off, alerting me that I'm going through that 5,000 foot hard deck, and the ocean is just getting bigger and bigger very rapidly. I desperately, to slow down, I pull back the throttle to idle. I put out the speed brake, and 2 seconds before impacting the ocean at the speed of sound, I pulled the ejection handle. And a normal ejection is incredibly violent. Even if you're straight and level flight below 180 knots, it still can compress your spine just from the force of the ejection rocket motor that shoots you out. And then flail injuries are very common from impacting the high-speed airflow. Even 180 knots, if you talk to experienced skydivers or special forces guys who've jumped out of aircraft at higher speeds like that, are like, yeah, 180 knots will hurt you. I was well outside the survivable envelope for this ejection, but I had no other choice. It was either certain doom and be vaporized with this aircraft or try something. And honestly, it was beyond like a conscious decision. It was just instinctual at that point. I reached between my legs, pulled the handle, and shot out of this thing. As soon as you pull that ejection seat handle, you get about a 50 G instantaneous force as that rocket motor ignites, and that just like crushes your spine like a soda can, you know. And then you ease to about a 12 to 14 G sustained rocket boost as you exit the aircraft. And the time that it takes for that ejection sequence to get you out of the aircraft is only 0.4 seconds. So less than a half a second. And all, you know, the canopy's blown loose and you're rocketed out of this thing for the ride of your life. And as what really messed me up, though, beyond just the ejection normal stuff that messes people up, was impacting the sound barrier with my body. The human body is not terribly aerodynamic at 695 miles per hour. And it just tore me apart. It ripped off my helmet, traumatic brain injury, bashed up my face. I looked like I just got my ass kicked in 15 rounds of boxing, the way my face was all swollen up and black and blue. I broke my neck, my C1. I broke my left scapula, bilateral humerus fractures. This humerus in my upper right arm tore through my brachial artery, causing rapid internal bleeding. My left forearm shattered the radius and ulna and severed the median nerve that controls my left hand. And my brachial plexus, which is the nerve group that controls a lot of your upper body, got damaged just from the compression and the flailing of my arms. The gear on my vest all shredded off, all my survival gear, my radio, my signaling equipment. Not that I could have even used it at this point because my arms were completely useless. And I was more or less paralyzed from the trauma of it all. My dry suit shredded open, the collar and the cuffs and the neck, all just shredded apart. So now I was getting exposed to the elements. My legs flailed around so violently in that high-speed air that the steel-toe boots on my feet became like medieval maces, smashing open my lower legs. The tib and fib with my lower leg bones shattered apart. Chunks of my bone were coming out with the open fractures, and now I'm bleeding out of my lower body as well. And this all just happens in a split second, you know. Right. It's just an explosion. 100 times the force of a Category 1 hurricane impacted my body instantaneously and just tore me apart. And very quickly, that parachute deployed and was able to slow me so I didn't die on impact. At the time that I pulled the ejection handle, I was 2 seconds from impact with the ocean. And a half of that second was used up to get me out of the aircraft. So within about a second and a half, from 1,500 feet above the ocean, that parachute was able to deploy and slow me enough so I didn't die. The aircraft impacted the ocean and just vaporized into nothing. The biggest pieces they found of it were maybe the size of a crumpled up license plate. But the parachute, it slowed me down enough. I plummeted into that icy cold ocean water, which very quickly started to fill up my dry suit. And for people who know what cold plunging is at 37 degrees Fahrenheit, it can be pretty sporty and it hurts, you know, like needles on your skin.
Oh, yeah.
But that parachute that had just saved my life very quickly sunk underneath the churning ocean swell and started to pull me beneath the surface. And for anybody who's ever been held under by a wave surfing or had to do any sort of drown proofing or whatever, need a breath of air and you can't get it, that's basically where I got to spend the next hour and a half to 2 hours just being drowned alive by my parachute that due to an equipment malfunction, again, the automatic disconnection system called the SMURF didn't operate properly and it didn't clear my parachute from me. And with my arms completely useless, I couldn't manually disconnect it. So that parachute just sunk under and just started to drown me. Fortunately, my flight lead, he spotted my parachute opening, coordinated a very rapid on-scene commander role, and was able to get a fishing vessel headed my way, a Coast Guard vessel, coordinate with air traffic control, and get a couple Navy H-60s heading to my position. But now I'm just a little dark head bobbing around at the surface of the ocean. And my beacon also malfunctioned. My radio equipment, my signaling equipment, everything was ripped off of me or destroyed. So the only way they were going to find me was going to be requiring a lot of luck at this point. But fortunately, this fishing vessel was directed over to my position and was able to keep a rough visual contact with me as I'm bobbing beneath the surface. And that saved my life. Had that fishing vessel not actually been where it was and able to get over there so quickly, they would have never found me.
So
likely.
let me ask you a question.
Sure.
You're floating around almost freezing temperature water. How did you not become hypothermic, or did you become hypothermic? Like, what? How did you not bleed out in that time?
Yeah, I became extremely hypothermic from the cold water temperatures. And once I was rescued and got it, I was, I coded several times in the helicopter ride. But when they got me into the trauma center, they took my core body temperature. I was at 87 degrees Fahrenheit body temperature, core body temperature. So I should have been dead from the hypothermia, but they also said, had my dry suit actually functioned properly after being in cold water and with a broken brachial artery and 2 open leg fractures, they said I would have bled to death way before anybody got there had I been nice and warm in my dry suit working properly.
So the hypothermic quality actually kept the blood in your body?
It did, because hypothermia naturally drives the blood in your extremities to your core, to your organs to keep you alive. And by doing that, it helped to preserve not only me from bleeding out, but they say it also helped to preserve brain function.
Wow, man. That's crazy. So basically everything that could have happened or gone wrong on this ejection went wrong.
It did.
Because I was an AT in the Navy. So I was an enlisted man and I handled avionics equipment. And even after I worked in an H-60 squadron, HS-8, 8-ballers out of San Diego. But after our birds would take off, we would do things like shoot IFF on all the fighter jets. And that was me running around. But I also had to do things with all the survival stuff, like the little antenna you're talking about, or the what is that radio called? It's like a survival radio.
Perk 90s, I think is what they were.
Yeah. And if that thing wasn't working, you're basically just floating around hoping somebody finds a needle in a haystack. But I mean, luckily you were engaged in a dogfight training session where there was another aircraft that can see you.
Yeah.
Do you guys ever fly solo missions in those jets, or is it always like a tandem formation thing?
We're typically operating in at least a section, if not a division. So 2 to 4 aircraft typically. So it's pretty rare to actually go out on a solo.
Okay.
But once in a while.
Okay. So you get picked up, and what is the recovery process like for that?
To get me out of the ocean. You mean?
Yeah. Just getting you out of the ocean with you can't move your arms or your legs. Actually, before that, how are you staying afloat with a parachute pulling you under? You can't obviously swim with your legs or your arms. Are you just
fortunately
gasping for air?
Yeah, fortunately the life preserver unit, the LPU, automatically inflated around my neck, and that provided enough buoyancy that at times it could counter that dragging effect of the parachute and would bring me to the surface so I could cough up water, scream for help, grab a quick breath of air, but it was just getting teabagged over and over. And it was really just at the mercy of the sea and that buoyancy. Fortunately, there's been a lot of cases where those LPUs will actually shred in high-speed ejection. So I was really fortunate that, they had, I think, maybe redesigned them to make them a little more robust. There's an Air Force F-15 pilot that went down in similar parameters of very high-speed ejection at low altitude. And when he ejected, it was so fast that it shredded his LPU. And fortunately, he had a little bit better body function, so he was able to keep himself afloat. But it wouldn't be uncommon for those things to malfunction as well.
Yeah. So getting you out of the water, what is that process like?
So yeah, unfortunately,
and there's a shark you mentioned. Is that in your mind at all? This shark?
Yeah. I don't have a linear memory from the time of ejection, but I've gotten back over the years. Well, all the information from the investigation that went down helped me to reconstruct a lot of this very accurately, but also through years of dealing with night terrors, I would get flashbacks of being in the ocean and being that feeling of dread and terror as I'm being pulled beneath the surface, conscious that I'm bleeding out, unable to breathe, and knowing that there's a big shark right in my space. And being a kid who was terrified of Jaws when I saw it, I think my parents showed me that movie when I was like 6 years old, which was probably a little too early in my life. But I was a little kid that was afraid to like go take a leak in the toilet because I thought Jaws was going to jump out and get me.
Fast forward to where you are now in the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah. So that was certainly like some pretty deep terror. Like, how does it get any worse than this? I'm getting drowned alive, I'm destroyed, can't use my body, and now there's a shark that's just going to come finish me off. But I learned later that actually big sharks, anything over about 1,000 pounds in the great white world, is only interested in whale or seal blubber and fat. Like if they smell, tissue or blood from those creatures, they get real excited. But human blood to them is, I learned later, is not really actually that appealing, and oftentimes is actually a deterrent. But
lucky for you,
I didn't know that at the time.
Yeah, lucky for you.
But yeah, luckily Mary Lee didn't want to eat me. And,
not on the menu.
And so my flight lead, he spotted this fishing vessel about a mile from my position. As soon as he saw my chute open, he dropped a GPS mark on my location, which was, I'm drifting in the ocean current, so that's not going to be accurate for very long. And what fumes of fuel he had remaining in his tanks, he attempted to contact them on maritime guard, but they weren't answering the radio frequency. That's the emergency maritime frequency. So he got down really low and really fast, and he thumped over the bow of their vessel. And that kind of like got their attention, like, holy shit, what's going on? They dialed up the emergency frequency, and he was able to direct them over to my location. When they arrived, they threw a rope out to me, and it just got tangled in the paracord. And with my arms destroyed, I couldn't grab it. But they at least provided, they kind of drifted away from my position a bit, but they at least provided a rough location as this rescue effort unfolded over the next couple hours. Air traffic control got involved. There's sending a Coast Guard vessel from Elizabeth City, just south of the position where I went down. And then there were 2 Navy H-60 Seahawks heading my way. One was from HS-11 that was based off the aircraft carrier that was nearby at that time. They had been instructed to pick me up and bring me back to the aircraft carrier, thinking, let's get you to help as fast as possible, but not realizing the extent of my injury. And that helicopter actually showed up first. Their rescue swimmer jumped in and, due to a miscommunication, thought I was on the fishing vessel, swam past me, got on the fishing vessel, and realized I wasn't there. And then, kind of in the chaos, couldn't find my position. But it was actually, again, another twist of fate. Had they actually got me out of the water sooner with those guys, they would have taken me back to the aircraft carrier, where I would very likely have perished from the severe injuries with no ability to deal with the level of trauma I was. And then now there's another H-60 coming from Norfolk, from HSC 28. They had been geared up for some sort of weapons exercise, I think, with the SEAL teams. And they got the call, and they very quickly changed their mission set to, hey, we need to go rescue this guy for real. One of the crew members, Joey, he had like a meatball sub he was munching on for his lunch as they're like just kind of casually getting ready for this training mission. And all of a sudden it's real, chucks it into the bag and throws it into the corner of into the cabin of the helicopter. And once they actually show up to get me out, the rescue swimmer, Cheech, he just the week prior had been involved in a Navy MH-53 Sea Dragon helicopter, had gone down in almost the same location. And the Navy policy at the time was, if you are involved in an aircraft accident, you have to be put onto a backboard before you're lifted into the helicopter to prevent any sort of exacerbating a spinal injury, which I most certainly had. But because they did that, and it took so long to put the people on the backboard, while everybody, I think, survived the initial impact in that helicopter crash, it took them so long to get them out of the water that several of the crew members perished from hypothermia. And so Cheech was on that rescue just a week prior. He didn't get any mental health counseling. He didn't get any time off to process it. And he's right back ready to jump in that icy cold ocean water with the last week in the back of his mind. He jumps in, and he said he gets down to me and hooked into my titanium carabiner that was on my harness. And he said the force of that parachute just pulled us both beneath the surface. And he had trained for that, but he said doing it in a warm, lit pool where you can see the bottom and being drug under is one thing, but being out in the open Atlantic and then having this tangle of paracord and parachute down in this dark blue abyss below you as you're just being pulled uncontrollably downward, he said was incredibly terrifying. But he got out his parachute knife. He was able to cut loose all this tangle of paracord that was just everywhere and get me back to the surface. And in his quick decision, he said, this guy's been in the ocean now for almost 2 hours and he's got to be severely hypothermic. He may have a spinal injury, which I did, but he made the game time decision. We just need to get this guy into the helicopter. So they got me out of the water as quickly as possible and then beelined it for Norfolk General, which was about a 40-minute flight from where we were at. And in that time, I coded multiple times. I was in and out of consciousness. They were doing everything they could to resuscitate me. In the chaos of it all, Joey's meatball sub broke loose from the wrapper and just got caked all over me. So as they're wheeling me off of the helicopter at Norfolk General, the medical staff's coming out and seeing me. And I got like chunks of gore and all marinara sauce, so they don't know what it is. And Joey's like, hey, listen, he's in bad shape, but that's just my lunch,
Oh my God.
They rushed me in to the hospital. They took my core body temp, as I mentioned earlier, is at 87 Fahrenheit. They started treating me for severe hypothermia. They started pumping the water out of my lungs, started blood transfusions because I had lost so much blood. Then I was having kidney shut down. My organs were shutting down from being overwhelmed with all this tissue damage and getting rhabdomyolysis. People are probably familiar with that if they, done some heavy duty like CrossFit workouts and stuff. People can get that from tissue breakdown. But now I had my arms and legs being destroyed. It was just overwhelming my body's filtration system, and my organs were starting to shut down. So they were very busy just to keep me alive. They ended up inducing a coma and then rushing me into surgery to salvage my extremities from amputation. And over the course of the next week, I underwent over a dozen different trauma surgeries, fasciotomies to salvage the limbs from compartment syndrome, which historically, if you get your arms or legs very badly damaged, the only remedy was really to just chop it off once it gets to a certain level. Fortunately, with the skilled surgeons that were able to perform these fasciotomies, they're able to open up the muscle tissue and the fascia that coats the muscle that can cause this constricting. When all that muscle tissue is inflamed, it can cause the blood flow to cut off, which will kill the limb. But when they open that fascia tissue, they're able to relieve that pressure and get the blood circulating. They reconstructed my arms and legs with titanium rods and steel plates and screws. So now I have like a legit Wolverine skeleton going on inside me. And then after a week in the coma, they transferred me over to Naval Hospital Portsmouth. And, all my friends and family are hanging out, my squadron mates at the ICU, just waiting to hear, like, is he going to live? Like, what's going to be his status? Is he going to be a vegetable? And the same guy that just before the flight had said I hadn't done anything to their call sign kind of piped up and he goes, oh, he's a scrappy motherfucker. He'll be all right. And so they took scrappy motherfucker and they shortened it down to SMURF, the sort of makeshift acronym. And because it's the Navy, you got to have a politically correct cover story. So the way they got it approved was saying I was a short guy who had turned blue from hypothermia. And so at least out of all this, I got a call sign.
Yeah. That's crazy, man. But you eventually went back to flying though, didn't you? Briefly?
Yeah. I spent a total of 2 weeks in that coma. And when I came to, paralyzed, confused with the head injury and all the meds they had me on, eventually the staff came in and said, hey, your flying career is over. You're not going to ever be able to walk again or use your arms. But there was something that lit up inside me when they said I couldn't do something, which was this reaction of, well, fuck you guys. I'm going to prove you wrong. And so it became my mission every day to just fight to get better. And over the course of the next 3 months, living in an inpatient VA Polytrauma Center in Richmond, Virginia, undergoing all sorts of therapies all day, every day, getting pumped full of every type of pharmaceutical drug known to man, just about, eating shit VA food, and getting woke up all night to take my vitals and then given sleep medication so I could sleep, which was just insanity. I eventually got the ability to walk around on a walker again and wipe my own ass, which was a huge victory. And then I spent the next 2 years overcoming prescription drug addiction, undergoing more surgeries, getting a stack of medical waivers, going through a field naval aviator evaluation board for the mishap and seeing my role in it, and getting the blessing to return to the cockpit. And after 2 full years of all of this, I was able to max out the Navy's physical fitness test again. And I got the clear to go back to fly Super Hornets. And it was, a moment of serious triumph after overcoming all that. And this is sort of like where the Disney happy ending version of my story would end, but this is actually where the real challenging part just begins. Let me grab a drink.
Right. And what's interesting is that, like, I talk to a lot of vets. We're plugged into the community, and we all have a kind of similar story of how, for one reason or another, we sought help at the VA, and it was, the first answer was pharmaceuticals and therapies that you may not need. There wasn't really like a custom individual approach to the care. It was like this broad strokes, this is what we do for everybody kind of thing. And human beings we're individuals. Everybody's body is different. So what happened next? Like, what was the thing that really kind of woke you up out of being super over medicated and wanting to find a path forward?
Yeah. So, I returned to the cockpit. I seemed to be doing really well physically, mentally, performing well. And I started to notice little lapses here and there that I just largely ignored them and said, I had my bell rung pretty good. I just kind of toughed it out. And I continued flying, and I was back flying for about 1.5 years from when I got medically cleared again. And I was on a detachment at Tyndall Air Force Base, and we were doing a live fire missile exercise, and I got to go fight a F-22 Raptor doing what we call DACT, or dissimilar air combat training. And I came back from that flight and realized that I had these huge gaps in my memory. And I was getting kind of confused in the debrief by stuff that normally made sense intuitively. And I tried to get some rest, but for the next 2 nights, I just couldn't sleep. I was getting these panic attacks. I was getting vertigo. And what really did it is I was trying to set my alarm clock for the time I had to get up to go fly in the morning. And I couldn't figure out how to use the alarm or the math to just figure out the basic math of when I needed to get up. And so I ended up contacting the squadron safety officer saying something was not right. And there had been a number of issues in the F-18 community of the pressurization systems having this malfunction that had become common enough that they even had to start putting hyperbaric treatment facilities on the aircraft carriers to deal with guys that were getting decompression sickness from the rapid expansion of the gas within their blood, causing all sorts of issues. Or type 2 decompression sickness especially, which is when those little bubbles get in your brain and can kill you, cause an aneurysm or like a clot effectively. So the first thought was maybe I got DCS. So they rushed me to a dive base that was nearby at Mayport Dive Base. I spent the night inside the hyperbaric chamber under pressure to try to get the nitrogen that had come out of my blood out of solution and form little bubbles in my brain likely, and get that to like go back into the blood and clear out so I'd get normal blood flow and circulation back to my brain. I felt a little bit better after that, but the doc there was like, hey, considering your medical history, when you get back from this detachment, we really need you to consider going in to see the flight surgeon, which, in any sort of high-speed job in the military, the last thing you want to do is go into the doc, because especially with something that's going on with your mind, is that's a quick road to losing your clearance, your medical clearance, and even your security clearance, both of which I needed to do my job. So I still felt really out of it when I got back, and I knew I was in a state where I couldn't fly and I needed some help. So I very reluctantly went to see the flight surgeon, and pretty quickly got a delayed onset PTSD diagnosis. And then I started to experience, which all too many people feel or experience, which is the sort of conventional approach to treating mental health within the military and in most of mainstream medicine, which is, you're going to go sit with a psychologist, and then you're going to get some sort of medication prescribed to you to help deal with it. And unfortunately, what that does is it completely overlooks the underlying physiology of the brain, which has actually been injured. There's dysfunction because your brain has been injured. And that causes all sorts of hormonal imbalances. It causes functional impairments due to blood flow not circulating where it needs to, and all the connections get out of whack. And instead of treating the underlying traumatic brain injury that was likely exacerbated by this decompression event that had made it so bad for me, they just started giving me pills and sitting me down in these talk therapy sessions that became very frustrating. I think there's a place for some of that down the road once they actually healed my brain, but it was like, the hardware was still messed up, and now they're trying to work on talking about my emotions, which is incredibly frustrating, and it didn't do anything except make me more upset. And as time went on and the medication list increased, my condition continued to worsen. I started to slip into hypervigilance and paranoia. I started to feel like I was in the Truman Show. I was just experiencing persistent insomnia. Night after night, I wasn't getting restful sleep. And so they ended up giving me a medication called Seroquel, which is a heavy-duty antipsychotic that can be used at low doses for more stubborn cases of insomnia like I was having. And so when they started to give me that drug, it would knock me into this sort of unconscious state, but it wasn't restful sleep. And as time went on, I just needed more and more of the meds to get the same effect. And meanwhile, that underlying brain injury was just getting worse and worse. I ended up going into psychoses. I thought the government was hunting me. I thought my food and water were being poisoned. And in fact, I was being poisoned by the federal government, but it was in these FDA-approved pills that I was getting prescribed by people in white lab coats with doctorate degrees. And all too commonly, though, this is sort of the outcome of that treatment protocol, is all of these adverse effects and worsening symptoms, to the point I was eventually medically retired. I had become very suicidal. I felt I had left everybody down who had supported me to get back into the cockpit. I was in a very undermanned squadron, and they were already so overwhelmed, and I felt like I was just creating a burden for them. And I went to a very dark place, almost put a Glock in my mouth and ended my life. And the only thing that stopped me was my newborn son and my wife were laying next to me asleep, and I didn't want to wake them up. But had they not been there in that moment, I would have joined the 22 to 44 plus veterans a day, ending their own lives by choice. And I ended up going through a medical board, which is the bureaucratic equivalent of the Indiana Jones Temple of Doom, as I describe it. It's so riddled with booby traps to derail the service member. Despite having a stack of medical records, having the support of the medical staff and my command on base to get me through that process, having the legal representation say, hey, my case is a red cow, like a very obvious case for medical retirement. The thing got drug on for a year and a half. I had to do an appeals process. It was a shit show, but I was eventually medically retired and moved back to Northern Michigan with my family and continued treatment through the VA. And that same care continued. It was the only thing we can do is give you these FDA approved pills. And as time went on, I just continued to get worse and worse, to the point I ended up living in an inpatient psych facility. I'd gotten so psychotic that my wife couldn't care for me. And I saw just an absolute nightmare inside that facility, the way that they treat American veterans. And I'm not talking about, the things that I experienced in a psychotic state, but as I became more lucid in that facility at times, I could kind of see what was really going on. And there were some serious problems in that facility. It's incredibly understaffed. Everyone's kind of crammed into a small section of this bigger facility because that's all that they can support to keep open. You're inside this facility with a bunch of other veterans experiencing severe mental health issues. So all night, every night, you can just hear yelling and screaming and stomping feet and commotion because all these other people are in and out of psychoses and dealing with some serious issues. And when you're on one-to-one care like I was for being in a psychosis, the staff is required to come in every 15 minutes with a flashlight and shine the flashlight in your face to make sure you're not hurting yourself. And when you're in that state of hypervigilance, this creates a situation of worsening insomnia. You're not getting restful sleep by any means, any sleep really. More than the 15 minutes you might be able to doze off between those flashlights getting in your face if you're lucky. The food was absolute ultra processed junk. It was prison food. There was no nutritional value of content. Even the little margarine packets, it wasn't butter. It was 30 plus ingredients of things that are not food. And that goes for almost everything that was on the plate that we got. I made the mistake of asking for a salad at one point, and I got a plastic container with white shredded iceberg with zero nutritional value and an anemic pinkish cherry tomato on top, along with a little packet in a plastic wrapping of seed oil based dressing, which is terribly inflammatory and toxic with all the artificial crap that was in there. The water that comes out of the tap in the facility smells like it comes out of a broken hot tub. It's so full of chlorine and chemicals from the processing in downstate Michigan, Battle Creek area, crap water. What they do to try to cover up the flavor is they mix it with this artificially flavored, artificially colored raspberry lemonade tea mix. So you can kind of stomach the stuff, but you're being poisoned by the food. You're being poisoned by the water. You're not getting things that actually help to nourish you. You're getting things that actually deplete you just to consume them and have your body process them. And all this kind of shit shows up at your cells, and your cells can't process it. They can't function properly. You can't get the essential amino acids unless you eat them from microorganisms that were in the healthy soil that grew your food. And none of that's existent. So all that stuff is making you sicker. You don't get to go outside more than once a week, if you're lucky, into a concrete yard that's surrounded by high-rise brick buildings, metal fencing all around. There's no connection with nature, almost no sunlight exposure. Now you take a guy in the military and you put him through survival training, and you get a little taste of what being a prisoner of war is like in case you ever have to be captured. And you get a little taste of this, and you take perfectly mentally and physically robust, capable human beings, and you put them through that training. And the things that you get exposed to are sleep deprivation, malnourishment, being treated less than human, which also happens at this facility for mental health. When you're in a psychotic state, oftentimes people forget that you're still a human underneath that. We were dressed in scrubs, even prison scrubs, and the staff members are in white lab coats. So there's this sort of Stanford prison experiment dynamic in the VA inpatient psych facility that mirrors sort of what we experience in our prisoner of war training in survival school. But all these same components that you would do to an enemy combatant to break them in a prisoner of war scenario, sleep deprive them, malnourish them, confine them, treat them less than human. These are the same things that are happening to American veterans that are in a treatment facility that's supposed to help them heal. And instead, the only thing that's really given to you there are pills. And I feel it's either a level of incompetence that is almost unfathomable that has led to this being the policy at these treatment facilities, but there is nothing healing about your experience there. You are a prisoner. And despite being voluntarily admitted to this facility, I was not allowed to leave as I improved, and I wanted to go because I saw what was going on in this facility. This facility was making people sicker. It was breaking them so that they would be compliant and take these pills. And the pharmaceutical industry has a massive cash cow in the VA because their policies, which are largely controlled by the pharmaceutical industry now, through the way that they've kind of taken control of the VA system, It's to get more veterans on their products and to keep them there for life. It's not about healing you. Um, Anyways, I eventually tried to escape from this facility. I was injected with Haldol against my will, which is an incredibly violent experience that was torturous, legitimately 45 minutes to an hour of just torturous, uncomfortable pain. Um, while I was drooling on myself and they had eventually drugged me up and I had just turned into another one of these human zombies, these veteran zombies wandering around the facility. They directed me into a room, and while I'm literally drooling on myself, they had me filling out paperwork that committed me to the facility. It stripped me of my Second Amendment right to bear arms. It put me on the law enforcement information network as if I had committed a crime. Um, and so, here I was, an American veteran who had served my country honorably. And when I went for help, what I got was far more traumatic and damaging than helpful. Eventually, with the advocacy of my family, I spent about 40 days in that facility. They were able to get me out. And when I returned home, I was just a broken, very much felt betrayed human being. I felt that the country I had served had betrayed me, was betraying the veterans in that facility. How could this be the reality of it? And I felt that I had seen the thin veneer of society. Once you fall through the cracks of that, it was a pretty dark place to be. And I became very cut off from my family. My little kids would come up and try to play with me, and I would just push them away and tell them to leave me alone. I could barely do the dishes with all the meds and everything they had me on, and that brain injury just still being continuously bombarded with more damage and exacerbating. I could barely do the dishes. I could barely read a sentence without forgetting it. But I was fortunate to have a friend that stepped in and said, "Hey, man," and he gave me a book called Finding Ultra by Rich Roll. And it kind of talks about this guy's journey from being a high-level corporate attorney to dealing with alcoholism and just having his life kind of fall apart and get in this state of unhealth and sickness that all too many people experience. And he was able to find his way back to health and purpose through largely by changing his diet, eating a whole foods based lifestyle, exercising. And so I started to incorporate, and I started to learn little by little. As difficult as it was for me to read at the time, I was at least able to get enough from these publications to start making changes to my diet, to eating better foods, to cutting out, at this point, just to mask the misery that I was constantly in. I was drinking, I was using cannabis, just habitually. And it was just tearing me apart and making me worse, and just to try to mask the misery I was in. But as I started to get a little bit healthier, I also discovered the book, How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan. And that opened my eyes to this whole world of psychedelic assisted therapy. And so I reached out to an organization, Vet Solutions, that helps to provide that kind of treatment for veterans. I didn't qualify for their program, but they got me in touch with another organization. And pretty soon I found myself in this community of other veterans like myself. We had served the country honorably in high level roles in the military. We'd gotten beat up, battered up, brain injuries, exposure to, all the damaging things that military members get exposed to. And when they needed help, they got a PTSD diagnosis slapped on them and a bunch of pills that caused their life to just fall into chaos. A lot of guys had ended up homeless, living on the streets with serious drug addiction issues. We all had, different origins of how our injuries occurred or what we had been through, but we all shared this experience when we went for help and finally confessed, jeopardizing our careers. We all just got thrown into the same compartment of a PTSD label and psychotropic medications that just tore our lives apart. And through that community, I found access to a whole world of healing modalities that are out there for healing brain injury and healing the soul after these sort of terrible experiences that have transformed my life. And those including, psychedelic assisted therapy, hyperbaric oxygen therapy, nutraceutical protocols, dosing with high levels of high quality fish oil, traumatic brain injury treatment facilities and clinics, and blood testing to actually see where the dysfunction in my physiology is and address those issues, hormonal imbalances that are also common with traumatic brain injuries. And over the course of a few years now, I went from being nearly non-functional, on the verge of divorce, just a non-existent father, broken at the end, in this darkness that I thought I was just going to be trapped in until I ended my life. And I've gotten back so much. I've gotten back my family, a purpose, my ability to articulate the experience that I went through, which I think a lot of people that go through that cannot, they don't get it back. They aren't lucky enough to get the access that I did to these real treatments and to this health that I've been so graciously,
Your recovery
back.
it's so powerful. And for those that are listening and heard all of the stuff that happened to Kegan physically and mentally, I want to say that I traveled the world with him. I watched this guy run multiple marathons and half marathons. And that, to me, I didn't run a single marathon. I was there as a documentarian, but it was so motivating. And not just Kegan, but a lot of the other members. But you really have come so far, man. And I remember specifically in London is where I actually started seeing some of your scars from, because I think we got some acupuncture at one point and some IVs during that part. But that's where I actually saw some of your scars that you were talking about. And I think around then I asked you a question too. If you told me a story somewhere in your recovery, how piano helped you. It was both a thing that you can you didn't want to talk to anybody. So it was something you could do by yourself, but also something that actually helped dexterity with your hands and moving your fingers and stuff. You want to talk about that at all a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, I had an orthopedic surgeon that repaired, he did a tendon transfer on my left hand because I have a severed median nerve. That's the nerve that controls these three fingers, my pointer finger, middle finger, and my thumb. And so he was able to do the sort of Frankenstein procedure to connect a tendon from my wrist to my thumb so I could use my thumb. And then he split a tendon from my middle finger and ran it to my pointer finger. And it gave me the ability to make a fist, because before my hand was just kind of stuck like this. I could use these fingers, but these were just kind of numb, and they're still pretty numb, but it at least gave me enough function. And the doc was like, yeah, you should try playing the piano. And I played the piano a little bit as a kid. I wasn't very good, but I started to do that. In that, sending those signals to my fingers gave me back the dexterity in my recovery, to the point that I could operate the complex HOTAS systems in the F-18 Super Hornet, all the buttons on the controls and throttle. And it gave me back my grip, and there's still weakness and numbness, but the piano helped me regain, the ability to do this. Before, I was, after the surgery, to make my thumb do something, I was actually telling it to move my wrist. And then there's sort of this miscommunication to what was going on with these two fingers now that they were linked. But through playing the piano, I gained back like independent movement of those fingers. And they're still weaker, number, but it definitely improved my dexterity and allowed me to return to the cockpit and have a much more functional hand for day-to-day living. Another thing that we started talking about at the beginning of this, before I think you were recording, was woodworking. That was another thing that I started to do that was really mentally beneficial, because when you're woodworking and you're running these tools that you can chop your finger off with, it kind of puts you in the moment, and it snaps you out of this overwhelming world that you can get into when your brain is just stuck in fight or flight, hypervigilant mode all the time, where your mind is racing and anxiety ridden about everything in the future and worried about everything in your past, and your brain just gets out of control. But when you're woodworking, it kind of like focuses everything so that you don't chop your freaking fingers off, and so that you can make these very detailed cuts and carves with chisels and planers or whatever you're working with. And then it also allows you to create something beautiful that, is kind of the opposite of the work done in the military, where you're constantly working and doing all this stuff, but you rarely get to see like something productive that has come of what you're doing. And so it was very beneficial to have that, back. Like, I made this, I did something, and for it to be so therapeutic while doing it.
And there's a sense of pride for it too, right? Like, you create something that didn't exist before, and the surfboard behind you is something that you made, right?
It is, yeah.
And
This is one of the
you're
first ones I
displaying
did.
it, right? You're proud of it. You're displaying it. It's
Yeah.
it's gorgeous. I mean,
Thank you.
the sunset is phenomenal on top there.
Yeah, that's my friend. He's a SARC. He's like a special forces medic with the SEAL teams. He was able to get me a big chunk of this East Indian rosewood, and he's actually the guy who got me started on woodworking. He brought me just this big chunk of wood. I wasn't a woodworker at the time. I didn't know the first thing about it. He just gave it to me, and there was something within me that kind of was calling. And it turns out at Dam Neck, they've got like a whole woodworking shop, which is, for those who don't know, that's like where some of the more high-level SEAL teams operate out of. And one of the things those guys do for therapy is they go in and they do woodworking. And they found it so beneficial that they even put this installation on their base so guys can go in and woodwork. But
that's amazing. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's good to hear.
And so Leo, being, this medical expert that he was, I think he suspected intuitively that, like, maybe this will help him, because I was kind of going through my healing journey at that point, big time. And it did. I initially started, I got a little lathe, and I started carving these pipes, tobacco pipes. And I one day I showed up. Leo was a surfer as well. And so that's how I got to know him. But one of the days I showed up and I gave him this pipe that I had carved, and he was just kind of like, out of the same East Indian rose, was beautiful wood patterning and everything. And once you polish it all up, it just looks so gorgeous.
That's gorgeous.
And he was like kind of taken aback, I think, like, holy crap, you actually did something with that. I don't know that he's expecting I was going to build anything. But then that evolved over time. I was building furniture, and then later hollow wooden surfboards like behind me, and I glass them and everything so you can surf them.
That's amazing.
Surfing's also been incredibly therapeutic and actually helped me get through some really challenging times. Just being out there connected with nature in the ocean, breathing fresh salt water around the surfing atmosphere, catching the wave, being in that moment. And sometimes being crushed by the waves, like, that's all very therapeutic. And through this big journey, a lesson I've learned is, the further we drift from what is natural, the sicker we become. And I think we're seeing that very widespread in our society right now. Our food systems are largely cut off from natural. The food that we're eating out of the grocery stores is, I'd say 95% of the stuff you find at a typical grocery store is junk. It's not natural food, and it's making people sick, and people are spending all their time on their phones and their computers and not going outside. And we're just kind of getting cut off from nature. And we're seeing that exacerbate because we are natural creatures. We belong in the wild.
You know what bothers me about, like, you can get natural fruits and vegetables at a grocery store, but they'll plastic wrap them. Like, right. It has a wrapper, right? You can lay in the wet dirt and be okay. Right. And yet we wrap microplastics. Yeah. Like, it's unnecessary. But is there anything else, like, for the book? Do you have anything planned after its release, or just book tours and promote your story?
Yeah. Yeah, the book goes into far greater detail on, all of this. This was like a real quick version of it.
Too long, didn't read.
It goes into a lot more detail. I think people will find interesting, and it also provides some really valuable how-tos and, like, step-by-steps and practical guides on how people can apply this to their own life. And it also provides a list of resources in the book, so other folks can gain access to some of this stuff.
Amazing. But is there an audio version of the book?
Yeah, it's going to be released on Audible. That should be released around the same day as the hardcover, paperback, and ebook, which is January 21st. But you can just get on Amazon. It should all be on there in whatever form you prefer. And if it's not released right on the 21st, it should be very shortly thereafter. I know they're uploading probably as we speak. It's getting uploaded to their Amazon software so that they can have that available here shortly. But my plans are, I've been kind of doing a podcast tour because I'm doing this whole thing on a shoestring budget. I don't have the big bucks to like just go travel all over the country at the moment. I am planning for the spring. I'm going to do like my parents let me borrow their van, their camper van. So I'm going to go do like sort of a little road trip tour, maybe try to hit some more podcasts, and try to get this thing out to the world organically. The whole book publishing world and marketing world is so corrupt with bullshit that has been very frustrating. Like
Pay to play.
It's all pay to play, man. You want to be a New York Times bestselling author, you basically write the New York Times $100,000 check. You want to be on a TED Talk, you write them a check for $5,500 to $25,000, depending on how many views you want, ranging from 100,000 views at the $5,500 mark up to $2.5 million or 2.5 million views guaranteed if you pay them 25 grand. So social media has become that way. You know, the days of just getting things to go viral on there has turned. I had a really, after the 7X trip, actually, there was a video that was put up of me from that trip, and I started to get some following on social media. And as it's growing, like hundreds of people a day started following me, I had someone reach out, which I suspect is from the social media platform. But they said, hey, we really like your content. We want to see you go to the next level. Here's our payment options for this plan. You know, pay us $1,600 a month or whatever it was, and we'll ensure that you get this many hundreds of thousands of followers each month. And I was like, well, it's just growing naturally at the moment, so no, thank you. Also, I don't have $1,500 to give to a social media company. And as soon as I declined their offer, they pulled a lever somewhere, and my profile has just been shoved in a corner. And I'm getting about the same engagement that I got when I had like a couple hundred followers now. So, you know, social media has kind of been corrupted with that. All these things that I thought were notoriously based, you know, on the merit of your product being a good product or idea, or, you know, book awards even. You basically pay to have a book award of any sort. So I'm trying to find creative ways to get around that, going on podcasts and try to spread this a different way.
I think I'm a big reader of like paperback books still, and the good books are usually slow burns. You have an incredible story, it's going to seep out there. And you're right, those New York Times bestsellers, like you could pay to play to have it on New York Times list, but that's weekly. So if you got on the New York Times bestseller list for a week, are you going to be that next week and the week following? You should be exponentially growing. And I think starting on a grassroots level, what you're doing is a phenomenal idea. And if you get that van and want to come up to Buffalo, New York and see Niagara Falls, we'll get you here in front of a live studio audience to tell your story. Okay. And make some conversions for you.
Let's keep in touch with that. It might be in the works here.
For sure. Well, Kegan, thanks for coming by and telling us your story.
I got a copy here so you can see.
There you go.
Actually, Bryce Hansen from the 7X trip, he did the cover design. This is one of his paintings.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Phoenix Revival. That's what it looks like. You can't miss it on the shelves. It's very unique. In the story, again, it gets into far more interesting detail than we kind of glossed over today. But
yeah, I would say, I mean, you only have a short amount of time of the podcast, but that was a really good overview of your story. And my copy comes as soon as it gets released, and I can't wait to jump into it. I'll leave you a review, and we'll make sure to spread your story out there, man. Thanks again for coming. I'm so glad that I got to meet you and hang out with you.
Likewise.
It was an amazing trip. Are you going to the Armed Forces shootout this year?
I'm hoping to. Yeah. Well, yeah, I think I'll be able to make it.
Maybe I'll see you there next time if I head down for sure.
Yeah, man, I'm looking forward to hanging out again.
Yeah, dude. Well, thanks a lot, man. Cheers.
Yeah, you bet. Cheers.